Sleeping Dogs as a series had a rough development. Not only did the original get delayed multiple times, but its planned sequel and future spin-off game were outright cancelled. According to VG Charts, Sleeping Dogs had only sold about 1 million copies within its first year, way below the expectations of the developers. Sadly, I haven't found any info past this, so there's no way to know if the game gained a ton more sales in a future year, but looking at the previously mentioned info about its future titles, it seems that it never really caught on as much as they wanted to. But despite this, the game garnered a large following of eager fans. Under many YouTube videos about the game, you'll see countless comments from fans of the series who all agree Sleeping Dogs is an underrated gem and deserves a sequel. So let's talk about Sleeping Dogs, the most underrated game of all time. So Sleeping Dogs is a third-person open-world brawler. I usually hate using other games as a comparison, but to help some people understand the game a bit more, it's got that open-world and intriguing story elements many games of its genre have, but also the combat of the Batman Arkham games, where a 1v12 is not only possible, but actually a fair fight. The game takes place in Hong Kong, China, a lovely set piece for the game. It's on a large map compared to other games of the same genre, but I never saw this as a problem. Some open-world games suffer from having large maps with little content, making you travel miles just to find something. Sleeping Dogs went for the smaller but more packed map approach, and it complements the game quite well. The story stars our protagonist Shen, who seems to be a criminal of some sort as he's dealing with some contraband to some gang members. We see multiple angles from outside the deal, and we discover that the police are waiting to arrest them. The deal goes wrong and the police intervene. Wei and his friend flee the scene, and we get introduced to the parkour mechanics of the game, allowing chase scenes to feel more smooth and action-packed. It's not as deep as, say, Assassin's Creed, as you aren't allowed to climb any wall you see, but assuming the ledge isn't too high up, you can most definitely climb it. Wei gets caught and brought in for questioning until the cameras get turned off, and we see that Wei was actually an undercover cop working with the police to put those guys in jail. It's a nice twist to the start of the game. Wei is once again working with the police, but more specifically Pendrew, Raymond, and Inspector Tang to bring down the Sun On Yi. That's why earlier we see Wei talking with Jackie, as he's the easiest way to get into the gang. Wei grew up in Hong Kong. Most of the guys in the Sun On Yi are from a town called Old Prosperity, so they were all childhood friends at one point back in the day, so it makes sense that he's the undercover agent for this mission. Raymond, however, is concerned, claiming Wei may have some personal vendettas, as Wei blames the death of his family on the triad gangs of Hong Kong, so it makes sense that things may get a bit too personal. Jackie walks with us to the Golden Koi so he can introduce us to the gang, but a group of punks arrive and try to start some shit with us. This is where the Arkham game combat is introduced. I think this was actually quite smart. The enemies in this section only push you, and while it does do damage, it's extremely minor. This section is an intertwined tutorial. I've always liked it when the tutorial doesn't feel like one. Yes, there are tips and button prompts, but I've never liked when the game teaches you shooting or fighting and enemies conveniently show up like they were forced to fight you because the tutorial said so. Even though we don't know who they are and have little info about the game's story, we can assume that they don't like Jackie or are a rival gang to the Sun On Yi. This gives meaning, albeit small, to this encounter, which is better than none at all. The tutorial does a pretty good job of teaching the player the basic mechanics of offensive fighting, while also letting the player know that you can use your environment to your advantage. When we get to the Golden Koi, we meet some of the gang, specifically Winston and Conroy. Neither like us at the moment, and Conroy uses this time to fight us, so we can prove that we aren't a weak link. After a fight, a man named Dog Eyes appears, and Winston doesn't seem too happy to see him, and neither does Wei.
Hey, who's the new blood?
It's Wei. You remember Mimi Shen? Back when you first started getting girls from Big Smiley?
Oh, Mimi. Oh, yeah. First girl ever sucked my cock. Yeah, so what?
Wei's her brother.
Minus the parkour showcase, we're about 10 minutes into the game and already we're introduced to numerous characters with varying personalities. Jackie always feels like the gang's younger brother, the one who's respected amongst everyone and picked on the most, as he's seen as the younger brother. Currently, Conroy and Winston feel the same, two hard asses doing what's right for the gang, but this will slowly change and evolve over the course of the game. And then Dog Eyes, someone who has more confidence, charisma, and sarcasm than anyone we've met so far. He's extremely cocky and loves to provoke people. This separates the characters a ton, making them feel like actual characters, not copy-pasted NPCs put in a game because the devs needed characters for the player to meet. While it's not clear right now, as the game progresses, we see the characters evolve, showing different emotions not shown in the beginning moments of the game, which once again ultimately makes them feel more real. The next 20 minutes or so is more combat and chase scenes, as well as introducing the player to a few more elements of the game, like food vendors and clothing shops. We do, however, get to see the cop and triad experience trees, which give us upgrades when we level up. We gain triad rank by fighting gang members, members, and we lose cop rank by destroying property or killing civilians. These become very handy as the game progresses. The last portion of this introduction, however, is quite important. We see Wei get arrested and questioned again. Hendra has to blow our cover and explain that we are an undercover cop trying to bring down the Sun on Yi, not join them. This was an excellent piece of critical storytelling. I tend to nitpick games a bit too much, and this halted one of my biggest nitpicks from years ago when I first played for the first time. Why do the cops arrest us when we're a cop ourselves? I assumed that maybe they were playing along, but why would they willingly get killed to play the part? This shut down my biggest question, and I was genuinely impressed they even mentioned this. After this cutscene though, we are given the option to explore the open world. While I was originally going to discuss the exploration and the open world of the game first, as that'd be a really nice transition, I want to go in depth on Sleeping Dogs' most important mechanic, its combat. Combat, as stated before, is the most important mechanic of the game. It was definitely the one that took the most development time too. If 85% of your game is centered around one mechanic, then you have to put lots of time into that to make sure you do it right, and Sleeping Dogs does this flawlessly. While the game does have both shooting and fighting combat, I'll focus on the hand-to-hand combat first. The fighting combat is centered around 3 buttons. You have your attack, your counter, and your grapple button. They are fairly self-explanatory at a basic level, but do get more complex past this. You can string at most a 5-hit combo. You can also end it short by holding the attack button, which delivers a swift kick to the opponent. So for an example, you could throw 5 punches in one string, or 4 punches in one kick. Of course, there are different variations of the kick depending on when you stop the combo. A combo consisting of 1 punch and 1 kick is a lot different than when you do 3 punches and 1 kick. They all do damage to the opponent, but depending on your situation, one may be suited better than the other. For example, throwing 5 straight punches at more tougher and bigger enemies will have them counterattack you, causing you to have some health loss. Another example is maybe you want to do some devastating damage really quickly. Depending on the upgrades you have, instead of kneeing them, you can follow up with a more devastating kick afterwards. Last sentence, I subtly mentioned upgrading. After meeting the dojo master for the first time, he will mention that if you find any of his missing statues out in the world, he will offer to teach you new moves if we return them to him, just like the one we mentioned. There are 11 in total to collect, and you'll most likely come across them in the story content anyway, as they're really hard to miss. You're obviously not going to be the only one fighting, however. Your opponent will have a red outline around them when they attempt to kick. By pressing the counter button, you can perform a counter attack, leaving them vulnerable to more hits. The last one is a grapple. This is a lot more helpful than it may seem, as some enemies who block can be broken by grappling them, and it also sets you up to perform environmental attacks, which also glow red. The combat technically stops here, but like any other fighting game of its kind, Sleeping Dogs adds variety in enemies to keep you on your toes while fighting. Your basic enemies are strikers, skinny guys that can be grappled without fail. Brawlers are a bit more muscular and block most of your attacks. Then there's the grapplers, huge fat guys who will grapple and throw you to the ground. They hit the hardest and cannot be grappled unless you have a full face meter. The face meter is the yellow bar in the bottom left. When it reaches full capacity, you can gain health in combat, as well as small other benefits like grabbing those big guys we mentioned, among other things. One thing that's sometimes overlooked in fighting combat is the ability to commit to attacks. With this game, you can seemingly do unnatural movements, but it's added to make the combat smoother. We can throw a kick at someone, and while the kick is still going, he could stop the kick right away and have enough time to block an incoming punch. It looks weird and unnatural, but if it wasn't part of the combat, it would destroy completely. It makes the flow from offense to defense feel smooth and not clunky. As if this wasn't added, you'd have to wait to attack, as you'd be worried that you'd be punished for attacking first, as others can swing right after you. And while in some games that may be fine, in Sleeping Dogs' combat it's always one against many, and that would be awful if this wasn't implemented. As I stated before, the majority of the game is fist fighting other gang members, and the best place to test your skill is a martial arts club. There's a set amount of rounds and enemies per round, as each one gets progressively harder and harder, and more people hop in to fight, sometimes being one of those grapplers or brawlers we mentioned. This by far is the best side content in the game. Fighting games like this are always entertaining. It's why I love the Arkham games so much, besides the excellent narrative. The fighting never feels boring, as enemies are always different, whether it's the number of people in the fight to the types of fighters. It's always going to be different, but that's where this lacks for me. Each club has the same number of rounds and same enemy types per round, so you can always know what to expect. That's why I wish this game of all games had challenge runs, like the ones from Dishonored, or if I'm going to compare it a third time, the Arkham games. The missions are always centered around fighting and are different from the next. Being able to do small challenges like no grapples or only punches would be a small yet genius implementation. The small challenges could be sometimes annoying when it restricts one of the main core parts of the combat, so having a few sections sprinkled in here and there of just raw fighting with large numbers, like the martial arts club without the consistent enemy numbers, would have been an amazing addition to this game. I personally love the fighting in this game. I don't want to stop fighting, so I always do the martial arts club as the quickest and easiest form of constant combat, but after a while the numbers of enemies per round is predictable, and now you're fighting with the knowledge of knowing who's going to enter the fight, but that's not the fun of the combat. The fun is not knowing who's going to show up. For one moment it could be 9 different guys. Some have knives and cleavers, other are different enemy types, and once you think you've finally beaten them, using everything you've gotten at your disposal, even more show up. And now there's even more knife wielders, and now grapplers have arrived too. It makes the combat more intense and exhilarating when you don't know what to expect. Using everything in the moment like knives in the environment instead of saving it because you know the bigger enemies are going to be coming soon. The other combat form we discussed was shooting. I think it's fairly standard combat. You have a variety of guns and the ability to take cover behind certain walls. There is quite the easy exploit with this, however, as you can activate slow time when vaulting over cover, so you'll usually see me vaulting over cover, popping a couple guys, then running back behind the same cover and repeating that cycle. I think it's quite obvious a lot of time went into the different moves and mechanics of hand-to-hand fighting rather than shooting combat, and I think that's okay. Not everything has to be amazing. Just because you add something to the game doesn't mean it needs to be the best. It's okay for certain mechanics to lack so others can shine, and I think the devs knew this, or they wouldn't have spent so much time making the fighting combat so seamless and smooth. Now I, like probably many of you, have explored more new places and locations in video games than in real life. My traveling journey has really only consisted of a couple states in the US, and that's really about it. The reason I bring this up is because I have no idea what Hong Kong looks like. I could easily look at videos on YouTube, but that's not really representative of the full Hong Kong experience. I can confidently say, however, that Sleeping Dogs is exactly what I envisioned Hong Kong would be. 13-year-old me would picture bustling city streets, crowded marketplaces, temples, and maybe the occasional rundown neighborhood, and it has it all. The island is split into 4 sections: North Point, Central, Aberdeen, and Kennedy Town. North Point is covered in tall gray buildings, with majority of its color coming from the overarching signs. This is in stark contrast to Central, which has palm trees across the streets and more tall buildings, but they look more like corporate office buildings, not your typical residential living space. We don't even have to walk outside to see this, as the further we progress in the game, the more apartments we unlock, and each one gets nicer and cleaner, going from a small one-room apartment with terrible furnishings and low-quality amenities to a multi-room suite. This whole map is accessible to the player at any time. Even though the quests at the beginning do go from area to area, once the map has been uncovered and introduced to the player via these quests, they start to vary in location. I like this, as it doesn't seem like a certain section of the map shouldn't be entered yet because the enemies may be too tough or the story hasn't taken us here yet. You're free to explore wherever you want, whenever you want. On the map is a large amount of content for the player to take part in. At the beginning, it's quite limited in its content and the locations of said content, but eventually it will expand, as to not overwhelm the player with tons of content right away. They're uniquely color-coded to help the player identify what is what. Most things in blue are going to be police-related work, drug busts to brawls to full-on investigations. Anything in orange is side content, cockfighting, racing, martial arts clubs, anything like that. And yellow is a favor quest. Increasing your face is like increasing your reputation in Hong Kong. The higher your face, the better rewards you can get. Starting from the beginning, like having a valet bring you a vehicle of your choosing, to getting massive discounts on clothing and cars. Pretty much the only side content that I would consider necessary is the favor missions, but even that you really don't have to do. These are small missions with many having very little story to them, as they can last maybe upwards of 2 to 3 minutes. There are very few recurring missions, such as Cheaters Never Prosper and any mission that involves Calvin. The street racer keeps getting cheated out of wins, so he asks us to break the winner's car who cheated. There are 3 parts to this quest, all with the same premise: find the car, break the car, beat up the guys who confront us. The missions with Calvin are also very similar as well. Usually Calvin will ask us for a ride and then commit some act of violence, whether it's knocking out a cop or shooting up a store. Most of these missions are very simple and won't take too long to do, and I've always felt that these are necessary to break up the pace of the quest when a player wants to do something else. If the player still wants to do a quest of some sort, but not something with a complete narrative to it that can maybe be done in a couple minutes for some easy XP and money, then these are what the quests would be. I mentioned earlier that the favor missions are technically the only necessary side content, which means the others aren't, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do them. The cockfighting, racing, and especially the martial arts club are some of my favorite things about the game. All are fairly self-explanatory but are very well made. Obviously we already went over the martial arts club, so I won't need to explain that again. But cockfighting allows you to bet money on illegal chicken fights occurring throughout the different parts of town. It's a nice little activity to have some fun with. The races are also split by class like most racing games do, so only certain class cars can race on certain races, so no one has an underpowered or overpowered vehicle. Something quite semi-hidden on the mini-map is when you scroll over a race, a line appears showing the actual racetrack, allowing you to prepare ahead of time should a race prove too difficult for you. But that's not all, as there are two other activities to do in the game that, while on the map, may be hard to spot or aren't color-coded orange. Gambling and karaoke. If betting on chickens isn't your thing, on the north and south points of the map is a large boat which houses offshore gambling dens. The only game available is Mahjong Poker, but it spices up the gambling scene of the game a bit. Karaoke is by far one of the best side contents in the game. Instead of using buttons on the controller, Sleeping Dogs has you move your left thumbstick up and down, all the way in one direction to hit the top and bottom, and a slight nudge to hit the middle too. It can be quite uncomfortable since there is times where you have to go into the middle, then to the top, then all the way back down really quickly while not trying to push the thumbstick too far, but it's definitely doable with enough time. Throughout the game, you can also meet some girls that way can take on dates. Sadly, this is one of the biggest missed opportunities. There are 5 women you can take on dates, all of whom are quite unique compared to the other, but you can only take them on one date. Mine is Sandra, who is technically 2 dates depending on how you look at it. All of the dates have unique objectives and experiences like taking pictures with Amanda, singing with Tiffany, or racing with Ileana. These are all fun, but you can really only do one date and that's all. I felt like this was on purpose since each date shows one of the collectibles on the map. Completing Amanda's will get the health shrines, and completing others will get the jade statues, the lockboxes, etc. It felt like the whole point was to date for the reward, not to have fun with them. I've never really liked the dating system of this game, and while it's definitely a negative aspect of the game, it barely dents the overall look of it, so I don't try to dwell on it too much. The side content in the exploration of the game is very well made. Hong Kong doesn't hit much as Night City does for me, where I can literally walk around for hours just looking at the environment, but in terms of actual content in the open world, there's enough variety and quantity to make sure you're never bored.
Jay? The fuck?
Even though Wei is undercover in the Sun On Yi, that doesn't mean he isn't a cop. Sleeping Dogs provides the player with numerous cop-related jobs Wei can help the Hong Kong PD with, from simple drug busts to full-on investigations. The 2 side content police jobs are drug busts and cop jobs. The cop jobs are part of a DLC pack that offers around 20 different situations. These are fairly straightforward with small amounts of variety depending on the location. Some could be simple brawls, but others could be police shootouts. These aren't random when you start the missions, however, just each one may be different than the last depending on which ones you chose, so maybe you get multiple scenarios in a row, or maybe you get 3 shootouts back to back. It all depends on what you tackle first. The second one is drug busts. These are the same every time, the only difference being the location. You arrive on the scene, defeat the gang members hanging around the location, bug the nearby camera, travel back to your apartment and watch the camera to spot the dealer, and once you're certain you found him, you can call in to arrest him. If you fail, no issue, because you could just restart the camera section and look again, and if you take too long, the game will just give it to you anyway. This was quite helpful since one of mine ended up bugging out really quickly. I really liked the idea of still doing cop activities even though you're undercover, but I could just never get behind these 2. They were interesting and unique, but after doing them a couple times, it's the same thing, and personally the drug busts are the absolute worst, since depending on your location, you may have to travel quite far to get back home. So if you're trying to run through lots of content and try to get one of the drug busts done and then maybe go down the street to get the other one, you have to go to the location, finish the handiwork, go to your apartment, finish the job, then go back to the spot where you were before but just travel a little farther to reach the next one. You're basically driving around in circles. At least the cop jobs end right where you started, so there isn't an annoying amount of backtracking. Even though these 2 jobs lack in actual entertainment in regards to the cop side of Sleeping Dogs, I think the investigations more than make up for it. There's only 4 in the game, and all of them have a unique situation, motive, and story. Our first case is about a guy named Popstar who seems to be dealing some drugs. We need to have proof of him committing a crime, so we need to play along for a bit. This requires us to extort money from his customers and bug a nearby camera to find his meetup location. We eavesdrop on the location and continue to follow him to the docks until we see him shoot his supplier. We photograph him in the act and call it in. It's not a terrible quest by any means, but it's a showcasing of what these cases are about, so it's a nice intro to a first-time player. They start to ramp up in story after this, however, as our next case is about street racing. Inspector Tang explains that there's a lot of illegal racing in Hong Kong, and sometimes people do die, but these don't seem like accidents. We call one of the street racers Ace, who we challenge to a race. After the race, we get a brief glimpse of another racer, Hotshot. We then get info on his last known location, and use a city cleanup van as our cover as to not look suspicious. We then bug the back of Hotshot's car so we can see where he goes. We can hear that Hotshot is getting suspicious of us, especially since the Sun On Yi just found out they had a rat in their gang, and now we just happen to show up soon after that person was just caught. We still have to play along as someone who just entered the street racing scene of Hong Kong, so we challenge him to yet another race. Things die down from here as we don't get any calls or reports of activity from Hotshot until we get a random call from Ace. Hotshot's apparently trying to kill him while he's talking with us, and once we finally triangulate his location, we get a call from his girlfriend. As we rush to the scene, we see Ace's car burned and destroyed. He's dead in the driver's seat, but at least his girlfriend is alive. We photograph our proof and settle this dispute with Hotshot once and for all. We end up requesting a 1v1 race with him. He's extremely hard to beat, but Wei has a plan to get the cops involved in the race, and they do as they set up a roadblock and arrest Hotshot as we escape. The third investigation is about a serial killing. 6 Triad members are all dead within a couple months and all were sliced open. It clearly doesn't make sense, so we're sent to investigate. We're also told someone we know is a part of the dead. As we arrive on scene, we discover that this is indeed a serial killer and that our friend was Vincent. If you don't remember who Vincent was when you first heard his name, no worries, neither did I. He showed up occasionally in the intro of the story, being a side character when he fought us during the intro with Conroy, and then when he was with us at the club later in the game. He didn't get as much screen time as Winston and Conroy, but was still a part of the gang regardless. Apparently every person we found at the site were all Sun On Yi gang members, and the incisions were quite delicate, so this must be a professional. Checking by the nearby hospital confirms this as we find out that a Dr. Sang has been working with the 18K, the rivals of the Sun On Yi, to kill Sun On Yi members, harvest their organs, and perform transplants to make money for the gang. This could be seen as a finished case until we get a call that our buddy Calvin is the next target. We see Calvin get abducted, and I'm not even going to ask how a huge guy like him was taken down, but regardless, we hijack the vehicle and drive him to safety. We obviously can't let him out of the trunk, as then that will blow our cover that we're an undercover cop, so we just let the Hong Kong PD handle the rest. Our last investigation occurs much later in the game. During one story mission, we meet with the rapper King and take him around Hong Kong. During this mission, we meet a girl at a nearby club called Ileana, who gives us her number, and a couple days later, she will call us saying that her friend Katushka, who we also saw at the club, was possibly abducted. Searching through her room confirms these suspicions. The place is ransacked and no one is home. The only evidence we have is a phone number which belongs to a Yar Kwai Lai, who frequently gambles at the offshore dens. If we assume he is the kidnapper, then we need him to kidnap another girl so we can follow him to the hideout. So we have to purposely lose a game of Mahjong poker while betting Ileana. We throw the game and we chase him to the hideout, only to find out that it wasn't just Ileana and Katushka, but 2 other girls are locked in the same cage. After dealing with the guards, we rescue everyone and complete the case. These missions are some of my favorite additional quests that allow you to take on these realistic investigations that are ended in one part but multi-mission stories with unique motives and situations that seem believable in the current time period. Kidnapping, street racing, serial killing, all these things make sense to be backdrops for these investigations as they're all quite common in the real world. I think what helps these quests is the pacing at which you can do them though. Most of the time you can't do these cases back to back. You'll have to wait some time before another appears. This is the same for even the multi-stage sections of the same case. Sometimes you can rifle through the entire case one lead after the other, but just like before, they can take some time to appear, so it breaks the pacing. And that mystery and withholding of content intrigues the player, wondering what's going to happen next, when am I going to be able to continue the mission, and other questions like that. I think the decision to keep the pacing of each case varied and unique to other cases makes it feel fresh and not repetitive. This, while also establishing realistic situations and exceptional stories, ultimately culminates in an excellent piece of additional content.
Son of a bitch, I'll kill you.
Oh, save your energy, Mr. Shen. You'll need it. The last cap I had in this chair lasted almost 48 hours. Would you like to try for a new record?
We have finally come to one of the best parts of Sleeping Dogs, its story. As always, spoiler warning ahead for the story of Sleeping Dogs, as even though the game is years old at this point, if what I previously mentioned has interested you, I highly recommend you experience the story for yourself. To recap, like we stated before, we are Wei Shen. We just got into the Water Street Gang, who is a small branch of the much bigger organization, the Sun On Yi. Winston is the leader of the Water Street Gang, and has not only been in beef with 18K, but also the Jade Gang, led by Dog Eyes. It sounds confusing, but here is the best way to put it on screen if you're a little confused. Jade and Water Street are both under the Sun on Yi, but both leaders are fighting over territory, so there's a civil war going on. While that's happening, the 18K is still the rival of both gangs, and more specifically, the entire Sun on Yi. A small bit of information for those who don't know, I believe all of the gang names in Sleeping Dogs are actually references to real-life gang names, being the Water Room Gang, Sun Yi On, and the 14K. Quite the little Easter egg for those who are knowledgeable in that sort of subject. To pick where we left off, Wei is still trying to play the role of a gang member, and he expresses his annoyance with Winston, who just keeps sending him on errands. Jackie understands his hate, but explains that both need to prove to Winston that they mean business, and a good start is screwing with Dog Eyes. Apparently he's got a shipment of watches coming soon, so they're gonna hijack it for themselves. We rob the gang and we make off with the watches, although we do find out that they're fake watches, so we almost did just get shot for some fake watches. We return to Winston, and he is pretty happy that we have been crippling Dog Eyes recently, but he wants to keep the pressure on him, so over the course of the next few missions, we're going to take over Dog Eyes' bus route and talk some sense into a past associate of Winston's who is now betraying him and working with Dog Eyes. While that happens, I wanted to showcase something Sleeping Dogs does really well, and its use of other languages in dialogue.
Now he's working for Dog Eyes. That Ham Garton is getting back at us for taking his minibus route.
Many times in the subtitles, you'll see parentheses with English words in them, which show us, the player, what the person is saying when they say certain words or phrases in a different language. The only game I can think of off the top of my head that does this is Assassin's Creed, and I've always loved this. It makes sense that the characters actually know the language they use and not just know it because the game's settings put the language to English. It's also nice for those who want to know a bit of the Hong Kong dialect if it interests them. I've always appreciated this in Assassin's Creed, and I love it here too. I've said earlier that there are two rival gangs, the Sun on Yi and the 18K, yet it seems like the Sun on Yi are fighting each other, and you're not wrong. Wei brings this up when he meets with Raymond to debrief with him in person, saying that there's a civil war going on and it's getting worse every day. Raymond doesn't seem to really care and only asks how Wei is doing, also briefly mentioning that Wei is still undercover and that he needs to not act too emotionally since he still believes Wei has a personal stake in this undercover operation, with Dog Eyes technically being the one who killed his sister. When we go back to the Golden Koi, the energy is a little tense in the room as the gang suspects Wei to be a cop. They started noticing a trend that since Wei has arrived, more of their gang members have been arrested. Wei's able to turn the conversation off him and onto Ming though.
Fucking rat! I sent you to Popstar, but now he's in jail! Yeah? And who stands to gain the most from that? You're gonna take over Popstar's whole ketamine racket now. No more scraps for you. You'll supply the whole city with drugs. You and Dog Eyes. Popstar's gone, but you're still dealing, aren't you? So who's supplying you? Are you guys actually listening to this asshole? He's a rat! He's a fucking rat!
你個冇狗用嘅垃圾! You're still working for that bastard, aren't you? 係咪啊?
Wait, I swear!
I was a dirty fucker,
我
man.
發誓唔係我，唔係我。
Wei uses this engagement to take some precautions and bug the restaurant with a mic. As we enter, we hear Winston mention that no cop is going to do what they're about to do, so if Wei is a cop, they'll know. That thing in question is a shootout against Dog Eyes' men. When we arrive at Club Bam Bam, we find out that Dog Eyes shot up Winston Mother's restaurant, the Golden Koi, so we're gonna go get some payback. Conroy, like Winston, also doesn't trust us yet either, so Conroy wants us to find a gun and kill some people ourselves. If they find out that we didn't kill anybody, then we have to be a cop. There are lots of guys in this warehouse, and multiple sections where we use and don't use firearms. Eventually though, we do make it to the owner of the drug plant, being Siwa, and escort him out of the building. This is a small turning point for Wei's position in the gang, as now Conroy and Winston, the two who have been the least trustworthy in us so far, now accept Wei as a full member of the Sun on Yi and the Water Street gang. The next morning we go back to the club and we hear from Winston that we're going to be going with him to meet Uncle Po, the Grand Master of the Sun on Yi. Uncle Po is definitely not happy about the shootout, considering the fact that both gangs are still a part of the Sun on Yi, so while yes, we did cripple Dog Eyes' production and wounded the Jade gang, we also still wounded the Sun on Yi, because they still both work for them. Winston gets sentimental with us here, saying that if anything happens to him that we look after the gang, his mom, and his fiancée Peggy, and that everyone in Water Street is a family no matter what happens. He also says quite the shocking sentence, that the Triad business is a tough one, but no matter what happens, the one thing that keeps the Water Street gang going is their bond and their brotherhood. This Winston is a lot different from the Winston in the intro. He's able to open up to Wei, and that makes him quite the likable character. He's a leader, he's got to be tough, especially in the Triad business, but he cares for his family, whether they be biological or not, and that means something to him. Winston also informs us on the chain of command in the gang. We have Uncle Po being the head master, then Pockmark, who is the advisor to Uncle Po. After them come the Red Pole veteran members of the Sun On Yee, including Big Smile Lee, Zhang, Zhao, Winston, and Dog Eyes, and then the regular members underneath them like Conroy, Jackie, Calvin, etc. When we meet with Uncle Po, he seems like a kind old man, but we do have to remember that he is the leader of a triad, so he definitely has an aggressive side to him. Uncle Po wants us to do a quick job for a guy named Roland, but it definitely seems like he wants us out of the room so he can talk with Winston alone. We also get to meet a new person named Ricky. Ricky works under Big Smile Lee and is one of his biggest backers, along with another member named Sonny Wo, who we'll get to later in the game. After this, we get to talk with Raymond once again. He's also quite annoyed about the shootout, as if it comes back that the police were somehow involved, it could be huge problems for everyone in the group. Raymond was close to pulling the plug on the entire operation until Wei brings up that he's now met with the chairman, which gets him even closer to the goal of bringing down the Sun On Yee. We come back to the Golden Koi and talk to Winston's mom, Mrs. Chu. Winston and Peggy are getting married soon, and Peggy needs to get more stuff for the wedding and, most importantly, see her dress. We get a quick introduction to Peggy and drive her over to the flower shop. She wants specifically black orchids with her dress, as she claims that they mean the couple will stay together for the rest of their lives. Sadly, there isn't any available in Hong Kong anymore except at the nearby temple, so we just forget about it and go pick up the cake. Except someone stole the van with the cake. We chase the van down and get the cake back, and then later we end up infiltrating the temple to get the orchid anyway. The monks, however, do not take kindly to this, and we return the orchid to Peggy and drop her off at the restaurant. This will be the last time I say it, but spoiler warning ahead. The next mission is the start of the climax of the Sleeping Dogs story. If anything I've mentioned about the story is remotely interesting to you, then click away now and play the game. With that, however, we come to the wedding. At the wedding is everybody. Winston, Peggy, Mrs. Chu, and tons more people. Winston motions us over and says that he has some of Uncle Po's favorite wine and that we need to get it for him. As we go to the van to pick up the wine, we hear some shooting. As we enter the banquet hall, we see that the staff is trying to attack us. We manage to defeat the staff and find Winston.
Winston! Shit. Oh God. Peggy!
Wait. Get Peggy out of here. She doesn't deserve this.
Winston. Winston! Fuck. Shit. Peggy.
This mission is and always will be heartbreaking. Both Peggy and Winston are dead at their own wedding. Do you remember earlier what Peggy said about the orchid?
A black orchid at a wedding guarantees that the couple stays together for the rest of their lives.
Like, fuck, man. Like, I genuinely hate talking about this mission. It's so depressing. The wedding was supposed to be this fun party to celebrate a marriage between two people, and not only does the wedding get shot up, the bride and the groom die at their own wedding. It's such a great mission, but I dread playing it because I know how terrible this outcome is. It's just fucking insane. Wei makes it outside and finds that Uncle Po was shot too. Luckily, we're able to get him to a hospital before he succumbs to his wounds. Raymond once again calls to meet up, and it's clear Wei isn't too happy.
It's war now.
No, it's not. You're a cop, all right? Your job is to enforce the law. You can't remember that? I'll pull you out right now.
Pull me out.
Your job was to get close to Winston. Now, that's not much of a strategy anymore.
Get close to. Open your eyes, Raymond. I am Winston now. With him gone, I'll be taking his place. You want the chairman? I report to him now. You want the Red Poles? I'm one of them.
That's what worries me, Wei. You're one of them.
So we then learn Wei is now going to be a Red Pole as he's taking over Winston's position. Obviously in this instance, Wei would gather with the Red Poles and Uncle Po to discuss what to do next with the Sun On Yee, but firstly we gotta talk to Miss Chu. She's currently grieving with a picture of Winston on her table, and when we meet with her, we tell her that we may know one of the gunmen, and that we may be able to bring justice to the situation. But she doesn't say to arrest him or kill him, but to bring him to the restaurant instead. This person in question happens to be Johnny Ratface. Johnny is hiding out near the docks with a bunch of guards. We go through this long sequence of fighting, shooting, and chasing until we hijack his car and bring him to Miss Chu.
I don't know what this guy told you.
佢話俾我聽，Winston 死嗰日你就喺嗰度。
Fuck!
而家你話俾我聽，邊個叫你做啊？
I don't know what you're talking about, you crazy old bitch. Please.
喂，你而家應該走，你走啦喂。
Wait, don't leave me here. She's fucking crazy. Okay. I'll tell you anything you want to know. Just please, don't.
With Johnny taken care of, we can now take care of the rest of the Sun On Yee business. The group talks and starts throwing out ideas as to who led the attack. Since we already took care of Johnny, we find out that he's an enforcer for Dog Eyes, so he seems like the one who led the attack. While the group argues, someone named Ponytail approaches us. He's a representative of Big Smile Lee, in that while the Water Street gang can continue to operate in the night market like before, all the money's now going to go to Big Smile Lee and nobody else because Winston's dead. Wei clearly doesn't like that and threatens him at gunpoint for making such a proposition. Because of this, Big Smile Lee's gang shoots up the club. This leads to a massive shootout and a chase scene where we corner Ponytail and fight him, except he escapes before we can kill him. While running from the police after the encounter, we meet with someone who helps us out, specifically Zhang, another Red Pole of the Sun On Yi. She explains to us that if Uncle Po were to live from his injuries, then everything is fine, business as usual, but if he dies, they have no leader, so she would prefer if Wei sides with her and not Big Smile Lee. Clearly, after what happened over the past 10 minutes, Wei's inclined to agree with her. Meeting with Mrs. Chu will confirm to us that it was in fact Dog Eyes who led the attack. We, like anyone in this situation would do, confront Dog Eyes at his hideout. Just like with Johnny, this is a sequence of chases and fights until we finally defeat him and bring him back to Mrs. Chu. We get to see what happened to Johnny, as he is now flavor for the food she made for Dog Eyes, forcing him to eat his own gang member. Jesus fucking Christ. We get a call to meet with everyone at the hospital. Inside is Uncle Po, Pockmark, and the Red Poles. Before we are an official Red Pole, we need to do an initiation by making an example of an ex-member who betrayed the gang. I mentioned that anyone who wants to be initiated into the gang should join us too, so obviously we're gonna call Jackie. We then meet up with Jackie and take care of some business. As we can see from the rest of the cutscene and the talk with Jackie, he's freaking out. He's never killed anyone before, so he's not used to the feeling of taking someone's life. We tell Jackie to relax for the next couple days, and he definitely agrees as we attend the initiation ceremony with him. We get another conversation with Raymond later, and it's your typical conversation. Pendrew wants us to look into this Sonny Woe person as it's the next step into the gang. Raymond does mention, however, that he's going to take Jackie into custody. Wei's confused. Why of all people would Jackie be taken in? Raymond claims that he can give info out of him, so we need to set him up. Wei doesn't want to, and of course Raymond is quick to point out that Wei's becoming too attached to Jackie. Us, the player, feels the same way. Everyone loves Jackie. He's basically a kid, some goofy and funny guy we hang out with a lot, and we don't want him to go to jail. We realize how little power we have as an undercover cop, as the next morning when we do talk to Jackie, who has a plan to steal some jewelry, we escape, but he gets apprehended by the police. To add on to more problems, the 18K are trying to shoot up the hospital where Uncle Po is located, so we work together with Ricky and fend off the gang. The next set of missions we receive after this aren't really integral to the main story, but we do eventually get enough evidence we need to put Sonny Woe away in jail, and Pendrew releases Jackie because of our agreement we had with him a little earlier, saying that if we put Sonny Woe in jail, he'll release Jackie. Pendrew also congratulates us, saying that we can come in. We don't need to do any more cop work. We're finished. Around the time of these unimportant missions, we do find out that Uncle Po died in the hospital, and that there being no chairman, we win. The Sun On Yi's gone. Wei isn't satisfied, however, as he knows Big Smile Lee will just take over and if anything make the Sun On Yi worse. Pendrew says that if we continue to work with the Sun On Yi, we're making a big mistake. We would later regret that mistake as we go to the funeral to pay respects to Uncle Po. The 18K show up with Pendrew and start a shootout. After the shootout, the Red Poles discuss who should be the official chairman, and Big Smile Lee says that if we don't vote for him in the election process, we're making a big mistake. Judging for our mistake from last time with Pendrew, this probably can't be good either, and it's not, as Big Smile Lee sends his gang to attack us at the Golden Koi. For anyone paying attention, you may be asking, where's Jackie during all this? Really good question. He's currently being buried alive on an island. Yep.
Jackie! Jackie, shit! Oh, fuck!
Oh, fuck, man.
You alive?
You know what's how I fucking crazy. Fuck.
Are you okay?
Fuck, man. Fuck. Oh, man.
Calm down. I'm right here, brother.
Apparently, Big Smile Lee had him kidnapped during the shootout at the funeral. On the drive back to the mainland, Jackie starts talking about the gang again, saying he's done with all of it. He doesn't want to be in the gang anymore if this is what's going to happen. He thought being in the Sun On Yi was going to be this fun and wild experience, but now Peggy and Winston are dead and he almost joined them today. To help Jackie out, we do offer to scope out the election spot with him first thing tomorrow, just so there is no funny business beforehand.
Jackie? Jackie? The fuck? Oh, fuck. Oh my god. Jackie! Ah, fuck! Jackie! Ah! Motherfucker! Ah!
Wei is now captured and being tortured by the same guy who killed Jackie. Honestly, Jackie's death hit the hardest. It was the most out-of-nowhere death in the game, and personally, and I may be speaking for many when I say this, but I felt more attached to Jackie. We rarely did missions with us and Winston, just the two of us, but since the beginning, we've been doing duo jobs with Jackie. We beat up a ton of the guys in the intro, stole fake watches, jewelry, and tons more with him, and now he's gone. Wei breaks out of his bindings and kills everyone in his path. One thing that's always bothered me is how he's able to struggle walking straight one moment, then able to do numerous kicks and punches like nothing's ever happened. The ending of this whole sequence ends with a 1v1 against Tong, who we kill with his own machete. After we escape, we then reach the final mission of Sleeping Dogs, kill Big Smile Lee. While we drive, Wei reflects on his whole journey. This game went from doing typical gang work undercover to now taking down some of the biggest heads in the gang over things they did to fuck over Wei's friends. We killed Dog Eyes because of Winston's funeral, and we're gonna kill Big Smile Lee because of Jackie, amongst of other problems that he has. After cleaning through Big Smile Lee's guards, we make it to his compound where we get to gun down Ponytail. This scene is probably a good time to mention this, but I've always felt that the reason I like this game so much, besides the obvious reasons, is that it always reminded me of the Chinese fighting movies. Think like Jackie Chan, Jet Li, all those movies. That's the vibe I've gotten from this game. Whether that's actually true or not, who really knows? It's just how I felt about it. Movies like that have some sort of plot armor to them that the game is currently using right now. We just got cut open a bunch by Tong and took a shotgun shell to the shoulder, and he still has the capability to run, jump, and climb over a ton of obstacles and fight tons of guys at the same time. But then the story goes back on itself as it makes him wounded because he was punched a couple times by Big Smile Lee. I understand, I get it, I'm being a prick and I'm nitpicking small details again, I get it, but it doesn't take away from the overall impact of the scene. It's just a weird, confusing moment I had when playing. Wei eventually overcomes Big Smile Lee and throws him into the ice machine, and we have officially beaten Sleeping Dogs. We do get to see some extra cutscenes that are quite important, as we eventually get a video from Zhang of the hospital footage and find out that Pendrew actually killed Uncle Po. Judging by the officer Shen on the folder, Zhang knows we're a cop, but since we've helped her gain power in the gang and become the new headmaster, it seems like she's willing to overlook that detail. We also send Pendrew to jail, and more specifically, the same jail that has all the criminals we put away, like Sonny Wo and all the guys who want revenge against Pendrew.
You ready for life in prison?
What?
Because all your old buddies are gonna be waiting for you. I made sure they found out what you did to Uncle Po.
That's a fucking death sentence.
I know.
Where you can't. I won't last a day in there.
That's the plan.
Sleeping Dogs' story is one of the best pieces of video game fiction I've played in a while. It set up the setting and plot right away and would eventually show the player that not everyone is going to live, not everyone has this plot armor. It gave us the opportunity to briefly glimpse into the work of undercover cops, trying your hardest to not be attached and stay focused on the mission, but knowing that in the back of your head you care for the people you're with. It's hard not to like the Water Street Gang, and the game does this on purpose by setting up the backstory, that Wei and the others grew up together in old prosperity, so they're not just some random people, they're his childhood friends. This on top of making the characters likable and having them show us their soft sides by giving them the ability to open up about how they feel, like with Winston and his brotherhood and Jackie and his current feelings about the gang, make it even harder to dislike them as people, whether you're undercover or not. Wei claimed throughout the game that he wasn't getting attached, and even if Wei wasn't truly getting attached to the gang, us the player were. Maybe Raymond's talk about attachment to the gang were to us and not to Wei. I liked the Water Street guys. Winston, Conroy, Vincent, Jackie, all of them are really cool and unique and fun to do jobs with, so even if Wei wasn't getting attached, I was, and I think that's really the point.
Oh, Hong Kong will fear the name Big Scar Wu.
I usually don't like ending videos on a sour note like this, but I felt it would make sense to discuss the story first and the DLCs after. The reason I say sour note is because I personally don't like the DLCs all too much. Minus the pre-order bonuses, the game has 24 DLC, all of which come with the definitive edition of the game. 20 of them are packs that include vehicles, outfits, skins, and such, but the other 4 is what I want to focus on more. 2 of them are in-game DLCs, and the other 2 are seen on the main menu when you load up the game. Out of these 4, I really only like the Zodiac Tournament. The Nightmare at North Point is okay, but the other two I'm just really not all that into. For the in-game DLCs, we have the Zodiac Tournament and Wheels of Fury. Remember when I said Sleeping Dogs? It reminds me a lot of those Chinese fighting movies, and that's why I like them so much. Well, this DLC is exactly that. The whole thing from the film grain texture over the screen to the title card makes this feel like a full production film. According to the wiki, apparently this DLC might be a reference to the movie Enter the Dragon with Bruce Lee, and if that's the case, that makes a ton more sense. In the DLC, we travel to a nearby island via boat and discover we're part of a legendary tournament. Some of the richest people in Asia have attended and have bet millions on this tournament, and it feels alive in here, with people up and down the temples training and sitting around waiting for the next match. It's nice that it feels like a large celebrated event, not just 7 random people who were picked to fight each other. The owner of this tournament is a man by the name of Zhang, and he states in the beginning of the tournament that it will be very tough, as everyone attending are some of the greatest fighters around the world. This game even recommends that you upgrade your health more so that the DLC is easier, but I decided against it. Our first match is between a bunch of random martial artists. This is very similar to the martial art clubs in the main game, except with hazards. We're then instructed to follow the path to the back of the island, where we get to see some more fights with other contestants, until our first actual fight arrives. Unlike the typical no-name contestants, all the bosses have unique fighting styles and moves, making it harder to block them, which I liked a lot. Most of the moves enemies throw in the game are telegraphed quite easily, but I found myself getting hit by these more, making it seem like an actual back and forth fight, not just a one-sided brawl. The bosses also have quick time events like the grapplers do, and yes, while after some time they do get a little repetitive and telegraphed, the first few times did mix me up, because I didn't know what button to press. When a grappler grabs you from behind, you know immediately to spam Y to break out of it. It's not a challenge anymore, but by changing the button slightly for the bosses, it makes it a bit more refreshing. After the fight, we continue to explore the island until we meet a contestant who offers us tea, which we find out has been poisoned. It seems like the rich people who attended the fight wanted to see someone get poisoned and fight someone, and that just happened to be us. We then meet George, who has a lot of ground moves, more than we've seen all game. He's pretty much a pushover though if you remember the button inputs, as I don't think he landed a single grapple the entire fight. I'm not entirely well versed in different fighting styles, but throughout the map you'll find these fire opal statues that talk about 12 versions of fighting, from Muay Thai to Kenpo, and some of these styles are seen in the fighters we face. Muay Thai is described as striking knees and elbows, and MMA is more of a combination of wrestling and striking. It's a small change, but I'm glad the devs overall decided to make new moves for these bosses, and not just new moves, but new moves dedicated to specific fighting styles. It makes it feel like 2 intelligent fighters are battling. We have Shen being someone who I wouldn't say is a master of one style, but able to adapt and improve his style to his liking, versus George, who's a master of MMA. The 2 use their training and knowledge to fight one another in this 1v1 legendary battle. After Wei defeats George, he finds the flowers he needs to cure the poison, and then is sent to fight one more time. This is different, however, as after a couple of guys are defeated, 4 are left, and Zhang mentions that 1 shall live, as the ceiling will continue to lower until everyone is crushed by the spikes. Wei and the other 3 contestants agree that no matter who wins the fight, they will end up beating Zhang after this fight. This is some of the most intense fighting I've had in a while. You're able to throw people into the gears to stop the ceiling from coming down faster, but even when I did that, I was really cutting it close to the end. The game threw out multiple brawlers who have more health and block most of my attacks, so I couldn't just spam moves until they fell over. I not only had to be quick, but smart about my fighting, and any mistake could end up killing me. Once we're declared the winner, we challenge Zhang, who we go through a chase scene all around the island until we come back to the first fighting location, and we discover that he's actually a master of the drunken style. This is a moveset of weird abnormal movements that mimic someone who's intoxicated. It's quite a hard style to fight against since it breaks the fundamental aspects of fighting since the movements are so different. It's an excellent and entertaining fight, and I probably wouldn't have cut it as close as I did in the gameplay if I had realized I could have parried one of his attacks earlier, as he kept using that a good amount of the time. But even if I figured that out earlier, he was still keeping me on edge. He's not like other opponents who I can just use the counter button against. I would sometimes not only have to do a quick time event, but also press the counter button shortly after, making it a very tough fight. Overall, the DLC, just like the next one we're going to be mentioning, took around 30 minutes to beat, so it's not too long, but I do wish it was a little bit longer. The DLC kind of felt a little rushed to me towards the end, where we go from 2 1v1 fights to a 4-man brawl, then killing the master all in around 30 minutes. I was assuming this tournament was going to be a multi-day event with certain times to train and fight, and maybe someone would sabotage you at night like with the tea and force you to fight not as healthy for your upcoming fight. Or maybe you eavesdrop on a conversation with Zhang and some of the rich viewers that that talk about killing someone, and you watch as someone gets killed during the fight you were spectating, so now you have a reason to put a stop to the tournament. I don't know, maybe it's just me, but I felt like I was left craving more. There could have been some time to form some small relationships with the other contestants, maybe participate in a 2v2 fight with that contestant, or maybe be forced to fight to the death with that fighter we've taken a liking to. Nevertheless, it was a fairly good DLC with lots of unique fights thanks to the new movesets that the fighters got, and I would definitely be replaying it again. The same, however, cannot be said for the Wheels of Fury DLC. This DLC starts with a person named Dr. Tang, who has quite the unique problem. He's building this invention, but the whole thing can't go through customs into Hong Kong, so the parts were shipped separately, and because of that, a rival gang has stolen the prototype, which just happens to be a supercar. We first have to find the supercar amongst the fakes that the 18K are driving. We know we have the right one, as the car will blow up if we're wrong. I honestly don't understand how the cars haven't blown up right now. I understand it's for the sake of gameplay, and once again I'm nitpicking, but technically the cars should have all blown up by then. Once we do find the correct car, we can bring it to Dr. Tang, and all the missions after this are missions testing out the new upgrades for the car, including an EMP, mounted machine guns, as well as a couple other smaller upgrades like ramming damage and overall speed increase. At the end, it easily becomes the fastest and deadliest car in the game, and Dr. Tang wants to test out its thing in full glory with a local race against a bunch of gang members who want the car for themselves. It's a pretty cool car, sure, I just can't really get behind the mission of it. The car, depending on how fast you go, is actually extremely hard to control, causing you to crash more times than you'd think. And something about the car just kinda irks me a bit. I'm cool with sport and supercars in the game, but cars with mounted machine guns and an EMP just kinda bother me, like it doesn't really fit in the game. I don't know, if you've ever played this DLC, let me know what you think about it, because I've always been quite indifferent about it. The last two DLCs, as stated before, are located on the main menu and have separate saves and playthroughs, so your money and upgrades may not transfer over. It's unclear what exactly stays and gets added, since in the main game I didn't even collect half of the health shrines, but the DLCs assume I've collected all of them. But I'm also not allowed to use the dim mock counter in the DLCs, which is the last Jade statue upgrade, which I have, so I'm honestly a little unsure of what's added and taken away, but either way it's really not that big of a deal. The first DLC is Nightmare in North Point. While on a date with Not Ping, a ghost known as Smiley Cat arrives and possesses the citizens and abducts her. He also summons other ghosts from hell called the Zhang Shi to fight us. We catch up with Smiley Cat before we can even attempt to fight him, though he leaves. We then head back to the Golden Koi and we find Vincent. Vincent, if you remember, is dead. He's one of the victims of the serial killing we mentioned earlier in the video. He gets a lot more screen time in here and is actually a very entertaining character. Vincent mentions that there's something out back and there's this giant demon called a Yao Guai. We aren't able to defeat him just yet as we need some special ingredients to make a stew, which should give us some magical powers. Along the way, we find out that Vincent's going to be staying with us for most of the DLC. We get a chance to talk and hear about him more, and honestly, it's one of my favorite moments of the DLC. We end up obtaining the ingredients necessary to fight the Yao Guai, and with our new powers, we can confront Smiley Cat. When we drive over, Vincent lets us in on some information about this Smiley Cat person. Apparently, his original name was Big Scar Wu, and he ended up getting killed by Uncle Po, who ordered some gang members to kill him, and they did so by stabbing him 42 times. His body was then put in a grinder at the Smiley Cat factory, so he became bargain brand cat food. Literally. When we encounter Smiley Cat, he summons some familiar faces, Johnny Ratface, Dog Eyes, and Ponytail, who we all saw die in the main campaign. So now we have to kill them a second time. Johnny and Dog Eyes are similar to the last time, where it's a bunch of fighting combat until we reach them and then challenge them. Ponytail actually gives up as we strike a deal. He tells us where Smiley Cat is, and he gets to live in the afterlife peacefully. We find Smiley Cat at the nearby temple, and the reason we arrive here is because Ponytail also told us how to beat him. Uncle Po kept Smiley Cat's pinky finger here so that he can never rest in the afterlife, since a part of him still remained on Earth, so we need to go to the temple and burn it. Smiley Cat is obviously not going to just let us do that, so we fight him alongside several Yao Guai and Zhang Shi. We do end up defeating him and saving Not Ping, and also giving Vincent some noodles, and then we also get a nice little cliffhanger showing that he can still possess people even when he's fully dead. It's overall not a bad DLC. Vincent's commentary was a nice highlight, and being able to fight the other dead members we already killed was a nice touch, since they reference our last encounter with them quite frequently. I managed to beat the DLC in around 50 minutes. Most of this was because I did very little side content in the DLC. The only thing these pieces of side content actually give you, to my knowledge, is an achievement or a trophy, so there's really no reason to do them in-game. This was coupled with the fact that I disliked half the combat in this DLC, and this was an even bigger reason to not do the side objectives. The fighting is the same as before in the main game. Nothing's really changed, just how you defeat the enemies has changed. To defeat the Zhang Shi, you have to press the grapple button to fully destroy them, or if there's a spawner, you have to throw them into the spawner to stop them from respawning. The Yaoguai can be killed when you achieve a full face meter and get access to those magical powers with the stew we made. Individually, these are fine, just tweaking one core part of the game is okay, but when you add all 3 of them into the DLC, and sometimes even in one fight, it just becomes a chore. Now, instead of focusing on doing damage and actually fighting, I feel like I'm ticking things off my checklist of what to get done first. Oh, there's a portal? Well, let's grapple them and throw them in. If they attack, then just press counter and then grapple them again. Now, if the portals are down, let's defeat the Yaoguai since the Zhangxi will constantly spawn, so the player gets some way to get a face meter. Then when the Yaoguai is dead, finish off the remaining Zhangxi and then move on to the next encounter. It's always like this order because it's the easiest to do. Unlike in the traditional combat, which also occurs in the same DLC, where it's typical hand-to-hand fighting, where you swing first at the nearest person and anyone who wants to swing back is going to get countered. Yes, sometimes in the traditional combat there may be an order to things, like killing the brawlers or grapplers first because they're tougher enemies, but it's not always possible depending on the situation. Plus, the Zhangxi and Yaoguai have a necessary way to defeat them, a grapple or using the full face meter. You can defeat any regular enemy in the game any way you want. You have the freedom to choose, but not with these creatures. It made the combat a chore, and seeing as I rambled for quite a long time about why I love this game's combat, you could see why this is a negative to me. Our last DLC and last talking point of the video is the Year of the Snake. Wei has pissed off lots of people. It's quite meta since they refer to our constant property damage and destructive methods of force, so because of that, Wei is now a typical street cop, handing out tickets and dealing with small disputes, until he gets himself in a much larger problem. We see a couple suspicious people all dressed very similarly. After apprehending a few, we discover that there's a bomb in one of the cars, so we drive it into the ocean away from the public. The license plate on the car takes us to a warehouse which has tons of confusing items, signs, posters, and plastic explosives. It's also here where I discovered one of the most wild takedowns I've seen in the entire game. Honestly, I'm genuinely surprised that not only did I not kill him from this, he shrugged it off like it was nothing. What kind of guys are we dealing with here? As Wei finds out for us, something is going to be happening on New Year's. These guys were led by a Master Chu. This guy also has the most punchable voice I've heard in this game so far.
I don't know. He's helping. We're all helping.
The rest of the game from here is basically just doing jobs that prevent their uprising, like defusing bombs, stopping riots, and killing the cult members. After an insanely long time, we discover where the Master's location is, which is one of those offshore gambling den ships. We then confront and beat the Master and complete the DLC. So, where to start with this? The story and premise was okay, especially in the beginning where it seemed like a small petty crime which led to a bigger conspiracy. Where I lost interest was after we talked to the guy at the prison. Every mission from after this to the ending was what I just explained. Bomb defusal, fighting, and shooting. This lasted an entire hour and 3 minutes. To be fair, more than an hour's worth of the main game was fighting and shooting, so what's the difference? Actually, a ton. One mission after another we got calls or texts about bombs, riots, and that's all. No story progression. We didn't get any closer to finding the Master until the last mission when Inspector Tang calls us. Technically, we were making progress since in the context of the story we were stopping the attacks from the cultists, but it never felt like we were moving the story anywhere, just doing side quests with no real meaning. Something to raise the stakes of the mission would have been great. Yeah, a bomb being planted in a crowded place is definitely a tense situation, but after doing this for the 3rd or 4th time, it's quite stale. Maybe having the cultists capture Inspector Tang or bring her to the island, which could then segue into the final mission, would have just been really nice to at least change up the pace of this DLC. The DLC of Sleeping Dogs is not terrible by a long shot. They each tell a unique story that will intrigue some players, and I would definitely recommend that you at least play them as your opinion may differ from mine, but would I recommend multiple playthroughs? Probably not. Maybe the Zodiac tournament if you want to run through specific boss fights again, since the DLC does allow you to skip certain missions. As for the other 3, I'm personally going to stay away from them. Sleeping Dogs is unlike any game I've ever played, and if you've watched any part of this video, I think it's quite evident why I think that. Some may not agree with my problems with the game, and that's entirely okay. Games are meant to be judged and critiqued, and it shows your true passion and affinity for a game if you can still call a game great while addressing its obvious faults, as opposed to just ignoring them and saying the game is a masterpiece with no issues when we all know that's not true. Sometimes when I do these videos, I worry that I won't be able to talk long enough about a game, and I have this irrational fear that it turns out to be some quick 6-minute 6-minute video. There's nothing wrong with a short video, but I've always enjoyed making longer content, especially when it's about a whole game. It'd be weird if I condensed an entire game like this video to just 6 minutes. The only thing that worries me now is I may have had too much to talk about. I was thinking this was going to be a simple 6 to 7 page video essay, and currently I'm on page 18. So future me when I edit this is going to have a blast. But anyway, thank you all for joining me today as we looked through Sleeping Dogs. If you do want to pick this game up for yourself, it's around $20 to $30 USD, both physically and digitally. I highly recommend the Definitive Edition, which comes with those 24 DLC that we mentioned, which is definitely worth the $30. With that, like the video if you do enjoy. If you are new here, subscribe and check out my new playlist I made filled with video essays like this that you may also like. And if you're a returning viewer, I thank you for coming back. As always, take care everyone, and goodbye.